Spotlight. Make sure to say hi in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. We have a phenomenal show today. We are diving deep with best-selling author Howard Kaplan. He's a native of Los Angeles and he has lived in Israel, traveled extensively through Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. He holds a BA in Middle East History and from UC Berkeley and an MA in Philosophy of Education from UCLA. He's the author of 5 novels set in the Middle East, including Damascus Cover, which is a major motion picture starring Jonathan Rhys-Meyers and Sir John Hurt. So without further ado, Howard, we're going to bring you in. Here we go. Good morning. How are you, Howard?
I'm good. It's the new world. I only have to go to the home office to do an interview instead of get on an airplane.
Isn't it different these days? I know. It's a totally different world that we live in. I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to have, specifically because of the topic. But I want to talk about the journey first. At the age of 21, you were sent on a mission into the Soviet Union to smuggle a dissident's manuscript on microfilm to London. Now, that trip was a success. Tell us what happened after that.
Well, I went back the following year. I thought I would go back every year because I wanted to do something to help the Jews in Russia. My parents were Holocaust survivors. My mother had been in Auschwitz. I felt people didn't do enough for her. So I thought I would try to do what I can. But I was actually in Kharkiv, which in the Ukraine, which then was under the Soviets. So it was called Kharkov. Ukrainians took their names back. And I was meeting with some dissidents and walking back to they walked me back to the trolley at night, and a wall of KGB officers jumped out from against a building and grabbed us. They pushed me up against a wall, but the Russian Jews I was with were treated more roughly. One of them was hit in the stomach. It was an era of détente. So it was a little less scary to be in the Soviet Union than it might be today. I'm not sure I would have done the trip today, but at that time I was willing to do anything.
Right. And so that sounds scary. Right off the bat, that sounds really scary. How old, can I ask how old you were at that point?
I just turned 21. It was the summer of my 21st birthday in July.
A youngster.
They interrogated me for 2 days in the hotel manager's office. Then they took me to Moscow with KGB agents on both sides of me on the commercial flight. And what was sort of interesting and maybe frightening, it was those days, there were no, what do you call it, jetways. You walked off the plane onto the tarmac, and waiting for me were 2 KGB agents who told me they were in-tourist guides. And one of them spoke perfect British English. The other spoke perfect American English. You would not have known they were not natives of those countries. In my mind, I had this fantasy that maybe they were the children of diplomats who were raised, abroad, but you would have thought this guy was from Los Angeles. And they interrogated me for 2 days in a hotel outside of Moscow airport. And the most interesting thing about that was there was no restaurant. So every time we had to eat, they walked into the airport, and since they were KGB, they walked me through passport control, through customs, through security, through everything, to the departure lounge. I had a meal, then they walked me all the way back. And I thought the message was, if you behave and tell us what we want to know, we'll let you stay in the departure lounge one day and go. And ultimately, I was on a 14-day tour, and maybe for political reasons, they didn't want to create an incident. They expelled me to London on my actual flight that I was due. They took me on day 10. They held me 4 days, and they expelled me on the 14th day.
As a 21-year-old, Howard, what were you thinking?
I was a cocky kid. I was thinking that I was okay, that my American, before I had a child, people always tell you that. I have a 29-year-old son now, that you don't do different, you do different things before you have a child than after. And
Right.
in fact, in the departure lounge, the American said to me, I don't want to see anything written about this, or we can meet you anywhere in the world, and next time we won't be so humanistic. I remember the word exactly. And I thought, oh, good, I should write about this. And I actually wrote, it's a novel that's not in print now, but I did write a novel too about these experiences in Russia. It was so long ago, there's no Word file, and you can't do modern books without a Word file, and they actually have to retype the whole book into Word. It was written on a typewriter.
Wow. Wow. So when did Damascus Cover fall into all of this? Was that years later, or when did
No,
that
it
happen?
actually was around the same time. I was on my junior year abroad at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem from Berkeley, and I had a friend who wanted to go to the Arab countries. He said, let's really see what's going on. So we went to Cyprus. The American embassy was very cooperative in giving us a new passport in exchange for our old without Israeli stamps. We flew to Beirut. There was a American studying my parallel partner, his junior abroad in Lebanon. We knew where to go for him, and we went to his room. This is a fabulous experience, and my first experience in the Arab world. It's really the day we arrived, and I learned a lot about Arab hospitality and how it was a desert culture, and people were welcomed into each other's tents in the desert. So Arab hospitality is something that almost doesn't exist anywhere in the world to that extent. So we knocked on this guy's door. It turned out the American, it was a Friday, was away for the weekend. His Syrian roommate invited us with our sleeping bags to come stay in his room for the weekend until his friend came back. And during this period, the Syrian plane, there is a shared taxi from Beirut to Damascus. It's only about 50 miles, and they give you a visa at the border pretty easily. I'm not sure it exists today, I'm sure, but at that time, and that's what we did. And we went to Damascus, and I was with my friend. We went to the great Umayyad Mosque, which is one of the great wonders of the world. Then we went to where the Jewish is in Damascus, and my friend said, we're being followed. He said he saw someone. I remember how we remembered him. His pants were rolled up. He was wearing shoes without socks. And he said he was behind us at the mosque, and now he's here. And we didn't enter the Jewish community for that reason. And instead, we went back to the main square and took a shared taxi back to Beirut because we were frightened.
Wow.
But that began, even though I was there the day, the square was where the Israeli spy Eli Cohen was hung in 1966. There was a TV movie about that recently with Sacha Baron Cohen, who can play serious stuff too. And it whetted my appetite for Syria. So very shortly thereafter, when I graduated Berkeley, I started to write this novel about Syrian Jewry. And the idea that I write a suspense novel that it might reach a larger audience certainly than a historical tomb. There were 75,000 Jews in Syria in 1948. Today there are none. But I have two books of Syria. I'm sure we'll get to the new one, but the difference is in the Damascus cover, there were 5,000 Jews left in Syria who were being held hostage. In the Syrian Sunset, the new book, there are no Jews left in Syria. They're all gone. They got out various means. I want to make sure they weren't executed or whatever. And there's a scene in the Syrian Sunset that's an actual historical event where Bashar al-Assad entertained Nancy Pelosi and a congressional delegation in something called the Talisman Hotel, which is a beautiful boutique hotel in East Damascus in the Jewish quarter, because it was formerly a big Jewish home. And they turned it into this hotel. And I have to say, he has a wife named Alma, who is sort of the Princess Diana of the Middle East. She appears on the cover of Vogue magazine. And they did a kind of tap dance for the congressional delegation. This was in 2008, so before the Syrian Civil War. So I've had this sort of lifelong interest, research, and reading about Syria based on this one day in Damascus. It's a fantastic, it's actually the oldest continuously inhabited city on the planet because it's on the trade route from China to the Mediterranean. And it's an oasis. Maybe that's another way to explain it. People, you think of Damascus as what it actually is, and I like descriptions a lot in my books. There's an underground river in Lebanon that stays underground for 50 miles, and it rises in Damascus in this oasis, branches into 7 branches, and the entire oasis is full of fruit trees. And in fact, I use this too. One of their biggest exports are apricots, and they make a kind of apricot paste that is exported throughout the Arab world, because then it's mixed with hot water and it's drunk at Ramadan, to break the fast. So all of this comes from this desert oasis of Syria.
So Howard, I want to jump in right here because you've now mentioned Syrian Sunset, and that's really what I want to focus on today because it's your new book, but more, everything that happened prior is what led you ultimately to want to write this book. So What is the actual idea behind this to share with our audience as to why
I said I've been sort of cause-oriented. I went to Russia as a young person because of things that were not done to help my parents. I then I'd gone to Syria a few months before. I wrote, it's a little too much for one podcast, but I wrote 3 novels of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that look even-handedly at both sides. I'm not interested. The way I often talk about it is, my mother was treated as the other in Auschwitz, and I don't want to treat anybody as the other. And that includes the Hispanics in LA, the African Americans in my house in high school, or Palestinians wherever they may be.
Kudos to you.
What struck me then was this tremendous disaster of the Syrian Civil War and the attempts to intervene. And without getting political, I think we didn't intervene in Syria, and probably a big mistake was made because we could have gone in cruise missiles to take out the helicopter gunships. So part of the moral thrust of the novel is it asks the question: what happened was, historically, Obama said there's a red line. If Syria crosses the red line with chemical weapons, that's whatever the penalty is. A year later, Syria let loose chemical weapons in East Damascus on the rebels, while UN inspection team was in the Sheraton Hotel miles away in the center of Damascus. That was the audacity of this move. And recently, some people make a film from the Syrian Sunset. We'll see. It took a long time. They're talking to the UN. I actually had a Zoom conference of the United Nations because they will give their approval to the scenes with the UN officers and then ultimately a film if they find them accurate, and they're highly accurate. So what happened with the red line was there was no resolve involve in the West do anything with Syria, even though Obama wanted to, because
Right.
nobody would follow him because of the disaster of Iraq. So Britain actually voted to go in, and 13 members of the British Parliament of David Cameron's party switched over to the other side to vote against it, because they said essentially Tony Blair followed Bush into Iraq, and it was a disaster, and we're not going to follow Obama into Syria. And the crime was that, and this is kind of the moral thrust, and I talked to the UN guys about this last week on the video. There was an idea to rid it, instead of going in, of ridding Syria of all their chemical weapons. So then rises, and Obama and Putin met each other, and the scene's recreated in the novel. And I have a funny Yiddish-speaking oligarch. I'll tell you about that in a second. Because he was modeled after Colin Powell, who spoke Yiddish, because he worked in a Jewish baby store for years when he was a teenager. And yeah, whenever I talk about it, often people say they haven't heard it.
Wow.
And so the moral question becomes, do you care how you die? And a character in the novel says, people care how they die up until the moment they're dead. Right. Then they don't care about anything. So the question is, if you remove Sarah, the novel's funny that way in a lot of ways, because it kind of balanced the horror of the situation. The oligarch's very funny, the Yiddish-speaking oligarch. And do you care if your family is killed by a barrel bomb or by sarin? I mean, some people might care, but that's the question the novel grapples with, because in the end, if they get rid of the sarin, but they leave the capacity, which they could have taken out with cruise missiles, and did not, to drop. The barrel bombs are, for example, people will know they're fertilizer bombs. They're fertilizer and diesel. So they're exactly what Timothy McVeigh used to blow up the FBI building in Oklahoma, I think it was in the 90s. So the Syrians developed, and they didn't need to get these weapons from Russia, metal casings were filled with fertilizer and diesel, and they could drop them from helicopter gunships. We could have taken out, there's not that many military airports in Syria. If you go back to Israel, they took out the entire Egyptian force on the ground in 1967, which is why it became the Six-Day War. It didn't last that long. So a decision was made to move towards getting the sarin out, but leaving the barrel bomb and the convention capability. So Bashar just said, I don't mind. I'll just kill him the old-fashioned way. And he did. So the novel deals with those kinds of issues.
So what?
They're historical.
Yeah, but you've written this as a novel. This is a story, art, right? A thriller. And I will tell you, and I said before we actually got on, I'm reading it right now, and you hooked me in the first several pages. You have a heroine in there, Lilia, who's. That's who I guess I must have felt very connected, because it's a woman and somebody who's out there doing her thing. So what's the story arc around here in which you put this historical?
So I'm going to give you away a little bit that you didn't read yet. The novel begins with the actual beginning of the Arab Spring in Syria. It's very easy to research. It's where spring began in North Africa, in Tunisia, and it spread to Syria. How did it spread? A bunch of schoolboys, this part you've gotten to, decided at night to spray paint their high school, their middle school. They were young, about anti-Bashar slogans. And they thought they could get away with it, but there are a lot of informers in Damascus who get paid, and they didn't get away with it, and they all got arrested. And they were treated very poorly. And this is where some place where research comes in. Something that was done, I could not have had the creativity to imagine, which was the Mukhabarat, which is the equivalent of the KGB, the Syrian secret police, called in all the parents of the, no, they called in the fathers because it's a patriarchal society, and the sheik, and they met with this Syrian secret police. They said, your kids are gone. You now bring in your wives, and we'll impregnate your wives for you, and you'll have more sons. Now, you know, this is a kind of brutality. And as I say, the novel is also, remind me before we close to tell you how I came up with the Yiddish-speaking oligarch, has those funny scenes that sort of balance it. So Layla, the woman that you're referring to, is just now in the beginning of the Arab Spring in Damascus. Slowly, they start letting women have a larger role in the revolution, in the upbringing, the way, you know, because they weren't. And she's allowed to work in the medical tent outside the mosque. All this is exactly accurate. Everything about that opening pages in Dara are exactly as they happened. So, but still, it's not absolute equality because the men are there 24 hours tending to the wounded and the other, but the women have to go home at sunset. But that's progress in Syria for them out there. So she is kidnapped on the way home one day. Now we begin fiction. This is all, up till now, it's all history. Now it's all fiction. She doesn't exist. She's not a real character. She's not based on anybody. And she's grabbed. And she's made an offer. And her offer, the offer made to her is, you can leave Syria with us now. You may never be able to come back. You won't be able to tell your family what happened to you. You'll be put up in the wall that disappeared because you're in a secret police van, even though we're not the secret police. And you can do something to help the Syrian people more than 1,000 nights spent in the courtyard mosque with whatever. And she's kind of cocky, you know, she has that young me in her. And as much as it's painful for her, she goes willingly and voluntarily. She doesn't know where she's going. She doesn't know who has taken her. And in reality, she is not the main female character. She is taken because the Israelis, in conjunction with Syrian general, who was working with both the American and the Israeli intelligence to try and better Syria. They wanted to infiltrate somebody in her place. So they have found an agent who looks like her, and they were going to move her into Syria in her place.
Howard, did you fashion this character after somebody that you know, or?
No, the main Israeli character, he wouldn't mind, is, I had a woman write me recently, she said she's in love with him. You know, he's in his 50s and married, or in his 60s by now. I have a friend, Abraham Infeld in Jerusalem, who is chairman emeritus of Hillel. He's the creator of Birthright, and I've known him for decades. And he's a kind of larger than life, gregarious, loud, and funny guy. And I've known him for so long, he just kind of comes out in a character. But maybe I'll go back to the Yiddish. I had the same problem. I had to create an oligarch, and I said, how am I going to do this? Am I going to create someone they're going to blackmail? And I thought, oh, the fact that blackmail this guy, it's just going to be so cliche-ish. And what are they going to come up with to blackmail him? You know, you've seen that 1,000 times. When I was in Russia at 21, the tour took me to Tashkent in Uzbekistan. And on my free time, I was walking around and I ran into a room of Jewish tailors. And they said American, and they pointed to their machines and they said, Zinger, Zinger, Zinger. They were all working on Singer sewing machines, which had the global market in the 1920s. This is now later than that. And I read later that, and they were Yiddish speaking, that Stalin moved a lot of people from Ukraine into Central Asia in case Ukraine was overrun in World War II by the Americans and the Germans. So here they were, and I put this together with Colin Powell being a Yiddish speaker, and I have a friend in Moscow who I met on a dating app who I've never met because I won't go to Moscow, but she gave me a little help, and she said, what they're doing here in Russia is turning the old movie theaters into huge entertainment centers. Entertainment center means there's a beauty parlor, there's a skating rink, video arcades. So that's what this oligarch does. And he's able both to be a friend of Putin's and to work for the betterment of Syria. And he's in love with Tom Hanks movies. And he thinks that he's troubled because if you remember Castaway, which was that great film where he's with Wilson and tennis ball, which you might not remember because it's really a small detail. The movie opens with Tom Hanks working for FedEx in Moscow. That's how the plane crashes. He's on a FedEx plane.
Right.
Remember, he keeps a package the whole day.
Right.
So this oligarch says, I do not believe the great Tom Hanks would work at FedEx. I believe him in saving private life, but I don't believe him in FedEx. And then throughout the adventures, the oligarch says, when we do the movie of my adventures, I want Tom Hanks to play me. So now we're seeing if we can talk to him.
Is this the oligarch that speaks Yiddish? Is this the same one?
He wants Tom Hanks to play him in the movie version of this story. He says so when he does the daring rescue, because the rescue goes a little too easily. So when we do the movie with Tom Hanks as me, it has to be a much more risky shooting at us to be great guys. It was the same thing. I get actually saying you have to do one of these close escape endings, the way they always do it. I said, no, I don't want to do it that way. It's just boring. I'm going to find a more interesting way to end the book. I was in Palm Springs yesterday talking with some movie people about whether they can go to Tom Hanks and see a play, The Oligarch. If there was a film, we don't have a film yet. It's in the beginning stages, but that was my idea. I thought, and I didn't intend it that way. It all started from this woman in Moscow telling me that they are redoing movie theaters as entertainment centers.
Wow.
So it became a theme through the Syrian Sunset the whole time.
So,
it's a long shot, but the Damascus cover got made with Sir John Hurt. Things kind of, I drove to Palm Springs for 3 hours yesterday to have a meeting with them.
And you didn't come and visit me, Howard. You did not come and visit me.
I was a little confused the whole day. He's how can I say this? He's someone deeply affected by his 11 missions in Iraq.
Got it.
And so he's I'm not sure if he was babysitting him or he me, but I think I was there with him.
So if you're just tuning in right now, we are talking to Howard Kaplan about his most recent novel called Syrian Sunset. I encourage you to take your phone out right now and take a scan. Just open your camera and take a scan. It will take you over. Well, don't do it right this second, but take you over to look at the book. Also, you can check out the Damascus cover, which we already said was actually made into a huge movie with, as you said, John Hurt and Jonathan Riss as well. Did you think that this is what was going to happen when you were 21, that you were going to become this big time writer, and that you were going to continue to have novels? You're going to have a movie made, maybe even a second movie. Is this something that was even in your thought as you've been taking this journey? This is huge.
When I wrote the Damascus cover, I was a little bit fortunate. I was in graduate school in education, and at that time, classes didn't start till 4 o'clock because they wanted teachers to be able to attend. And I sat home in my apartment in Westwood, in LA, and I thought, nobody will ever publish this. My father thought, nobody will ever publish you. And he would call me up and say, let's go to lunch at 11:30 because I want to take you out of there. He thought I was suffering in the apartment. I was rather enjoying myself. But I never quite communicated to that. And he lived till 103, lucidly.
God bless him.
And he only yelled at me, you could have been a lawyer until he was 96. At 96,
Wow.
He gave up. Although he was supportive in a young way. When the movie came out in the theaters, he bought like 20 tickets for all the relatives. And of course, when some few didn't, he was a Holocaust survivor. When a few didn't show up, he wanted to get the money back for those tickets. I said, just leave it, give it to the theater. It was a small independent theater, the Lemonade theaters. We don't need to go back for $27.
Do you have another book in you? Are you going to be doing another book?
I want to. These characters, especially Karamov, the Soviet oligarch, came out so well, and he's married. A lot of my characters have flaws, but like some of the reviews said, I don't like them initially, but you win me over all the time. For example, Karamov is married, and he has a mistress. We never see his wife, but we see his young mistress all the time. But she too is a little bit different. They're in Monaco, but she doesn't want to go shopping. She wants to go on helicopter rides where he goes fast. And he's a pilot. And she goes, enough jewelry. I want laughing.
Love it.
And over time, he wins you over in the same way with the Syrian general who, in order to remain head of military intelligence in Syria, he does some unpleasant things. But you begin to see that there's a great humanity in him. So I guess those are the kind of characters I like, who are flawed and who kind of rise above their limitations. So those are the kind of people I write about.
Well, I want to thank you for spending time with us. I want to make sure that our viewers know how to even ask you questions. We talked earlier, they can go over to Facebook and go to your Facebook page, Howard Kaplan Author. And if you have questions, Howard's going to answer them. Go over there and ask questions. We'd love to communicate with you and connect with you. Also, if you are using Instagram, go and check out Howard over there at Kaplan How. And finally, check out Howard's website at howardkaplanbooks.com. Any last minute thoughts you'd like to share with our audience? We've come to the end. I can't even believe where the time has gone. Any last minute thoughts in terms of the historical nature of what we're talking and about for our viewers?
So I'll tell you a brief story. Okay. When I sold the Damascus cover to Dutton, I was by then 27. The editor had me come to New York. I came to New York. He handed me a book called Harry's Game. Harry's Game was a novel about Ireland, Belfast. And he said, when you read this book, you smell Ireland. You smell Belfast. You feel that you're there. He said, read this book, this with Damascus. And that's what I've done with the two books. He taught me to go from just writing a story to delving into the locale, the streets. So I have maps of Damascus. I can walk around there better than Washington, D.C. I know my way around. And I learned from a book about Northern Ireland how to do it, just imitation. So he was a lifesaver. And I rewrote that draft of the Damascus cover, and the publisher was extremely happy with it when it came in.
Well, you mentioned to me earlier that when you wrote Syrian Sunset, there's actually pieces in there where you describe in great detail the location and everything so that we feel that we're in there. And I think that probably then comes from what you learned, right? When you were first doing the first book.
Yes,
Damascus.
because really, in terms of describing Damascus, I was only there for a day when I was 21. There's certainly, I remember geography, for example, there's a mountain behind the city where now the wealthier Damascus people get apartments, and there were restaurants with panoramic views, and that's where Syria, their chemical weapons secret labs. So I remember seeing the mountain, but now I know, about the caves that are there and who they worship in the caves and what happens.
So as readers and those, as you go out, and I encourage my viewers to go out, pick up the book, as you read it, you're going to feel like you are there. And that's kind of your secret sauce. I think it's your superpower, Howard, that when you
I
read
think it really is something that greatly, and even the scenes that are in are the same. They're very detailed about Jerusalem. I know better than Damascus, but I still do research.
Right.
There's a sculpture.
It becomes it's a historical novel. Exactly. Yes. Well, Howard, I want to say thank you, first of all, for spending time with me today. And also our audience, we know that you have many choices as to how you spend your time, but you chose to spend it with Howard and I today. And we want to thank you for that. Howard, I want you to have a great rest of the day. I want our audience to have a great rest of the day. And we will see all of you on the next Authors Spotlight. Goodbye, everyone.